Good afternoon and welcome back to Football League World TV. We have a show dedicated to Hull City this afternoon surrounding their managerial situation. Shota Arveladze sacked last Friday ahead of the game against Luton Town, and Pedro Martins, the current favourite and looking very much like he will be taking charge in East Yorkshire very shortly. I'm your host, Alfie Burns, and I'm delighted to be joined by my two colleagues, Ally and Toby Wilding. Marcus, how are you getting on this afternoon?
Yeah, really well, thanks, Alfie. Been something of a fall from grace already this season from Hull City. So, yeah, an interesting decision was made by the board. Interesting to see the first time that Ajun Ilijali has got rid of his own man as well, of course. So, plenty to discuss heading into today's show.
Absolutely. Toby, how are you this afternoon?
Yeah, all good, thanks. Obviously, the Championship giving us plenty to talk about when it comes to the managerial merry-go-round at the minute. So, yeah, good to get another one under the belt and looked into, because, as you say, there is all sorts of different subplots to this one to discuss.
Yeah, get the feeling that in 5 or 10 years you'll never be more than 20 yards away from a former Championship manager, the way that this season's going. Anyway, next up then we'll get stuck straight into Hull City. Shota Arveladze then sacked by Hull last Friday after 4 straight defeats. This came just hours before Hull's 2-0 defeat to Luton Town last Friday night. Couple of points that we'll touch on here just to get going with Arveladze. Were you surprised by the timing, first of all, of this sacking, Toby?
Yeah, I was. I think obviously we'd sort of been hearing whispers about the possibility of a change coming at Hull, hadn't we, for quite some time. But then to actually sort of make that announcement on the Friday morning just seemed really strange. I mean, to make that sort of decision on the morning of any game is an odd one, because of how it just sort of throws the the planning for just a few hours later sort of into disarray to some extent. That seems strange as it is, but the fact that it was the first game after an international break as well just sort of added to that even further. Hull had just had 2 weeks since their last outing where they could have gone out and made that decision quick off the back of the defeat at Swansea in that last game before the break, and that would have obviously given them 2 weeks without a match to go out, find a new manager, give him the time then to potentially come in, have a few days working with the squad and lay a few foundations for that Luton game on the Friday night. So yeah, to sort of leave it until then, rather than make the decision off the back of the defeat that appears to have been the straw that broke the camel's back, does seem like a bit of an odd one from Hull to me. And obviously it now means that, if it is Pedro Martins, as it looks likely, he's coming in and walking right into what is now an absolutely sort of packed, hectic schedule with how many sort of games that are coming up between now and the break for the World Cup. So that, of course, then means that he's sort of very much having to learn on the job about his squad, and his squad are very much having to learn on the job about him, with not much time between those games to sort of adapt to each other and adapt to the method. So yeah, it does seem like sort of a very odd piece of timing from Hull to make the decision when they did.
And coming to you then, Marcus, what were your thoughts on the general decision to get rid of Arveladze?
On the whole, I thought he probably deserved a few more weeks. I think there was probably enough promise in the back end of last season and the way they started this season to maybe give him the chance to ride it out a little bit. I think it was maybe four losses on the bounce, I'm pretty sure it was, before they pulled the trigger. Obviously, yeah, the timing very surprising on the day of a game. I think Ilijali's accident in the international break potentially had something to do with that. But I was in the camp that he deserved a little bit longer. I think it's going to take any manager quite a bit of time to get used to such a big squad at their disposal, and to sort of to assess it and find out what their best 11 is. So yeah, I think he deserved maybe sort of 3 or 4 more games to try and work that out. But then if that does go the wrong way, then you're potentially in the thick of a relegation battle. So it did look like it was going one way. The writing did appear to be on the wall in the maybe short to medium term, but I did think it was a little bit harsh to sack him as soon as they did.
the message from the board was that Arveladze's views did not align with that of the board. Toby, your thoughts on those kind of comments?
Yeah, I would be quite concerned with those if I was a Hull City supporter. I think, you sort of consider, as Marcus touched on right at the start, Arveladze was an Ilakali appointment, and so for the sort of the two visions of the manager and those above him at the club to have sort of veered so drastically that they felt a change was necessary. Sort of just a few months after Arveladze had been appointed, it just feels like quite a bit of a concern for me that things can go in so many different directions so quickly at a time when everyone needs to sort of be on the same page, and it does make me question. I mean, you would imagine that when that appointment was being made, there will have had to have been some sort of consensus between Arveladze coming in and the board that were already there, that things were going to be done in that one particular way. So the fact that disagreement has developed sort of what seems to be quite quickly is certainly a concern, and it would potentially, in my eyes, raise a few questions for anybody else sort of looking at this as a potential job, and could they be bitten in the same way in the future? And obviously that again will be a worry for supporters as well, because it sort of throws them up in the air about who they might actually be able to bring into their club and take over.
Pedro Martins then looks like the man that's going to replace Arveladze at Hull. But firstly, before we get into Martins as an individual, we'll just talk about what you both feel the route is that Hull should have gone down with regards to appointing a successor. It's obviously somebody that's a little bit more of a left field appointment, which Arveladze was as well. Do you feel, Marcus, that Hull should have really looked for somebody with a touch more Championship or EFL experience?
It's a difficult one. I think there's definitely less risk attached to an appointment where they've had previous success at the level. And you can expect maybe a quicker transition period if they do have that experience behind them. That said, left field appointments definitely can work, and you can't categorically say that picking someone who's been involved at the level before would give them an advantage. I think it's probably more ambitious to go with a left field one because of the situation that Hull are in the league table. Some maybe more cautious owners would be looking for someone who's been battling towards that end of the table before, maybe even someone like Grant McCann, who they removed last season, and sort of accepting that could be the portion of the table that the Tigers are competing in this season. Whereas going with a completely different option suggests that they are looking for someone that they believe in the long term can hit higher heights than the managers, that the other ones that have been linked who do have EFL experience. I think from a Hull fan's perspective, I would feel more comfortable about the club pulling away from the relegation zone and getting back up into a safe mid-table position if they did appoint someone who'd succeeded at the level before. But I think it's something that you've got to assess in the first few weeks and months of a new manager's reign. And yeah, in just their second appointment, they will probably still have the support of the fan base behind them in making their second choice of who's going to manage the club. So yeah, it's a difficult one. Obviously, yeah, I think it does increase fans' anxiety a little bit if they go with someone who's never managed at the level before. But I can see both sides and why you potentially look for a more left field appointment.
Toby, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps the fact that it does look as though Hull may be going left field, perhaps not as much of a surprise as it would potentially be with certain other clubs in the Championship when, as you sort of say about Ilakali, he's certainly, ever since he's come in, he does look as though he's made it clear that he is one who is going to do it his own way. I think we sort of saw that again in the transfer window with the sort of players that he was bringing in, that this was going to be very much a sort of an international, might be the word, sort of squad that he's bringing in. So I guess in that sense, it would arguably perhaps maybe work a bit better than it would for other clubs in terms of bringing in someone with that sort of, more European experience than maybe who can sort of get the best out of a lot of players who've played in those sorts of leagues, rather than someone maybe coming into a championship squad that has got a lot, that is more sort of based and developed in this country, where you might expect a sort of a manager with experience at this level to suit more. So yeah, obviously it's going to be a risk that unknown that Martins or any other left field appointment would be coming into, in terms of not working in this league, not perhaps knowing some of the other clubs and the styles of play. But it does at least mean that for me, I think he might have a better chance of getting what he needs to out of this whole squad than potentially a manager more used to just managing solely in this country might be able to do.
Pedro Martins, then he's 3-1 favourite, 3-1 on favourite for the job, and reports in the national media are saying that he's going to be taking charge of Hull very, very soon. His managerial career has seen him manage in both Portugal and Greece, but in no other countries apart from those two. Toby, is that a concern for him heading to the Championship, the lack of experience of real top level divisions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is a bit of a concern with that. I think there always is with any manager that comes in. You're never quite sure how they are going to sort of adapt to that new division. But as I say, I think what potentially makes this slightly safer than with another club, as I say, is the squad he has at Hull. I mean, I look at Dimitrios Pelkas, obviously a Greek international, and he looks like someone who could be hugely important to Hull City this season. So, having someone who has that sort of that Greek connection could potentially work. There's certainly a few players in that squad, the likes of Tobias Figueiredo, Jean-Michel Seri, and others who've got that experience in Portugal as well. So I think there is certainly sort of a connection there with this squad that Martins might be able to establish, that helps him sort of overcome that to some extent. And I think as well, you can't deny he had a great deal of success at Olympiacos. He won several league titles while he was there. So that again is something that sort of shows he can get the best out of a team. And you sort of look at that. Obviously, Olympiacos are owned by the same owner as Nottingham Forest, and we all know over here from that sort of experience how sort of erratic that can be in terms of the signings you get and the sort of expectations there are on you. So to be able to sort of cope with those demands of that sort of squad and that sort of expectation, and stay there for a few years as Martins was able to do, does sort of bode well when, as you say, you consider sort of the way that Hull went out and made so many sort of big investments in the window themselves this summer, which obviously, as I say, it enhances the squad. It grows it, but also adds to the expectation and the clear ambition that Illy Charlie has at the club.
What are your thoughts on the positives that will follow this seemingly inevitable appointment then, Marcus?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Toby's said there. I think it's important to acknowledge that this isn't an ordinary Championship job. This is not a squad that you'll typically come across at Championship level. The recruitment has not been conducted to sort of the way we're used to seeing in the second tier. And I think that Martin's experience at Olympiacos, where they would have had a massive squad for the level, one of the easier to do that in the Greek Super League due to their budget compared to their counterparts. I think that kind of man management style could help him in arriving in the dugout at Hull, because I do see that as one of the biggest challenges to a new manager is how do you manage expectations, manage individuals with the amount of options that they've got for each position in that squad. I was impressed just looking back at some of his work in Portugal. Obviously, it's hard to judge how transferable these skills and experiences will be, but he had Vitória Guimarães competing in the top 4-5 in the Liga Portugal, which is usually pretty tough to do with some very well-established clubs in those slots. I think that's where he's potentially ended up taking the job at Olympiacos and competing in the Champions League on a consistent basis off the back of that job. So it'll be interesting to see whether he can sort of implement ideas from that. But I do think the one thing that strikes me is that he could be suited more to this role is managing such a big squad and expectations, because that's definitely something that's going to be needed at Hull, and potentially even something that led to the demise of Arveladze towards the end, with such a big portion of that squad that just aren't picking up the minutes that they want to be at the moment.
We'll come back on to Pedro Martins a little bit later in the show, but we'll just discuss some of the other names that were linked with the Hull vacancy over the last week or so. And we'll start with two managers that we're familiar with in the Championship, in Carlos Carvalhal and Carlos Corberán. They were two names linked, albeit with sort of mixed reports about their actual standing in the race to take the job at Hull. Toby, do you feel that either Carvalhal or Corberán would have been a better fit than Martins looks to be?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. That, I mean, Corberán in particular, I think when you consider sort of the job he did with Huddersfield last season in exceeding expectations and getting them to the Championship playoff final as he did, would certainly make him an appealing potential appointment for Hull when you sort of look at the position they're in now. And certainly I think as well, when you sort of consider some of the comments that Corberán has made since his departure from Huddersfield about ambitions not matching up with those who are in charge at the John Smith Stadium, certainly suggests that maybe this would have been a job that might have appealed to him as well, because as we say, with sort of the work that Hull did in the transfer window over the summer, there can be no sort of questioning the aims that there are at that club. But then I think, ironically, this almost ties into the Martin situation. Obviously, Corberán has just been sacked from Olympiacos, of all clubs, after a pretty underwhelming start to the season. And when you go back to what we were just talking about the way that Martins himself was able to manage that sort of squad and expectations for several years, the fact that Corberán was only able to last for a few weeks in doing that same sort of role in what was a hugely busy transfer window for Olympiacos, a few marquee signings going in there, the likes of Marcelo among others. It just sort of raises a few questions about whether that perhaps would have been as suitable a match as it could have been on paper. Carvalhal, again, another one. He does have that greater experience, that man Corberán, both of sort of steadying a ship over in the Championship, which does feel like what Hull need at the minute, but also that sort of European experience. You know, he's worked in a number of different countries, Portugal, obviously, again, being another standout. So that potentially suggests that in a similar way to Martins, he maybe could have been able to sort of get the best out of such an international squad in the way that we are perhaps expecting Martins to do. So certainly there could have been decent appointments, but would I say that either of them really sort of majorly stood out in comparison to Martin as being somewhere ahead of him? I'm not overly convinced that they would have done.
Another interesting story that sort of emerged around the Hull job was involving Robbie Keane, who was reportedly interested in taking charge of Hull. Robbie Keane, of course, played in the Premier League for many years and for Ireland on the international stages, and a really well-renowned name in this country. Previous coaching experience with the Republic of Ireland as an assistant, and also at Middlesbrough, where he served as Jonathan Woodgate's assistant a couple of seasons ago. Marcus, bringing in somebody like Keane, if he was indeed interested in the job, would have been a little bit of a risk, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen some managers maybe get fast-tracked because their playing career, in terms of level that they go into the game, at in recent years. And I think potentially even at this stage, without knowing too much about Robbie Keane on the grass, this would be too big of a step up too quickly. I think we saw someone with the reputation outside of English football, at least, but in Scott Brown, take up his first role in management at Fleetwood Town this season, a club that was expected to be battling relegation in League One. I don't see why Robbie Keane should maybe have a sort of a higher expectation of the club that he's going to go in first at than that. And yeah, particularly with Hull looking over their shoulders at the moment, someone that hasn't managed before would feel like an unnecessary risk to take, even if it is an ambitious one and clearly an exciting name to come into the game at some point soon. But no, I don't think. I think the Tigers will be making the right move by avoiding appointing someone of that background.
Let's return to the odds-on favourite for the job then, Pedro Martins. What do you think, Toby, is going to be the main thing that he needs to address at Hull if he is indeed appointed the club's new head coach / manager?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, isn't there? I mean, I think the standout is obviously he needs to sort of find that best 11 and sort of find a way of keeping that sort of such a sizable squad happy. I think as well, and another big thing that any manager, and it seems like it will be Martins, is going to have to address. For me, his goals. You look at Hull right now, 11 goals in 11 championship games this season. 7 of those are courtesy of Oscar Estupiñán, and he hasn't scored since the end of August. So I think that sort of shows, sort of almost where Hull's problems really lie to a certain extent at the minute. I mean, you look back at that game against Luton. There was nothing really that Alfie Jones could do about his own goal, and then it was just an absolute stunner from Henry Lansbury. The Swansea game before that, again, it seemed to be largely individual errors that cost them. So, if you iron those out of your game defensively, it doesn't seem as though Hull are in too awful a position defensively. I mean, you look at the quality of some of their players that got back there, Jacob Greaves being a standout one. But as I say, at the other end of the pitch, he's finding them goals, finding someone who can step up now that Estupiñán's sort of early form has dropped off a bit. And I think that is going to be a standout issue for Martins, or, as I say, anybody who's coming into the club now.
What about you, Marcus? What do you think the main areas that need addressing are?
I actually look at the defence as a little bit more of a concern. I think that area of the pitch was underinvested when you compare to the major investment that came in the summer at the top of the pitch. I think possibly that the issues in the final third do fall into that consistency of selection problem, because it's harder for players to get familiar with each other and to build those partnerships, which has seen them fall away at the top end. I think that's a particular area of concern going into it, but it's going to be interesting to see what kind of style Martins wants to implement straight away. Results need to be a priority, because he doesn't have this credit in the bank built up in the EFL. Supporters will be getting more and more concerned if there is a wait for a win or anything like that, because that likely would result into them slipping into the bottom 3. Looking at this squad as a whole, regardless of who the manager is, I don't think they should be battling relegation. I can't see that being prolonged for too long. Regardless of what decision they make in the boardroom, but. It's going to be interesting to see. I do worry about the defence for now. Although Jacob Greaves is a big name, I think he's built a big reputation of playing in a back 3 and having a lot of time on the ball and looking good as a ball-playing centre-back. He's very fashionably left-footed as well. I definitely think that's an area that they need to focus on. I think they've got the individual firepower in the final third if they can find some good partnerships. They have had some injury issues there as well. And keeping Jean-Michel Seri fit is going to be crucial. It was an incredible coup to bring him in the first place. and they really have missed him when he hasn't been in the side so far this season. So, yeah, lots to work on really going into it. That they have not looked good at all in the last few weeks. But yeah, I think maybe in the short term to get them out of the worrying predicament they're in at the moment, I think shoring themselves up at the back could be the way to go.
You've semi-answered my next question there, Marcus, but 5 defeats on the trot leaves Hull looking over the shoulders. They're outside the relegation zone at the minute, but they only seem to be slipping in one direction. Pedro Martins, then, do you think he's got enough to keep them in the Championship if he is appointed, Marcus?
The jury's out still until we get a proper look at it. But yeah, I would be very surprised to see Hull be performing worse and their situation in the table to get any worse. I look at that squad and the ability that they showed at the start of the season, some of the high profile names in it as well. Yeah, I don't expect them to be hanging around the sort of bottom 6 picture for too much longer. Yeah, Martins has impressed with his longevity at Olympiacos and previous roles in Portugal. So yeah, I would lean on the side of saying that it's definitely more likely that he pushes them back into a safe mid-table position sooner rather than later.
Is that something that you agree with, Toby?
Yeah, I would say so. On the whole, I think the quality in that squad should be too much, and I think as well, obviously, you've got that January window to come where reinforcements can and you would imagine will come in if necessary. But I think as well, it's absolutely essential, isn't it, that Hull do make sure they avoid relegation when you consider the investment that will surely have been put into bringing these players, not just in terms of possible fees, but also the sort of the wages that some of these players, the likes of Jean-Michel Seri, are surely going to be on. Means that you almost feel as though Hull simply cannot afford to drop into League One, and if that was to happen, then they're going to lose a heck of a lot of that squad, and it puts them under pressure to sort of rebuild a whole other team again next summer, which is something that you would imagine they're going to want to avoid as well. So yeah, I think it's vital that they do avoid relegation, and as I say, with the squad that they've got and this expectation of Martins coming in with the experience he has in a club in the sort of situation that Hull are in terms of their squad and expectations, I do think they should have enough to stay in the Championship this season.
That concludes our look at Hull and their managerial situation. The Tigers are, of course, in action this evening against Wigan Athletic in the Championship, looking to stop a run of 5 straight defeats. Thanks to Marcus and Toby for joining me and offering their thoughts. Some really good points there. I feel any Hull fans catching up with this show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever later on, please do get yourselves in the comments below. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on the managerial situation and even the club's ownership at this moment in time. It'd be great to see what you've got to say. There'll be some shows coming up later in the week on Football League World TV as we reflect on the midweek action across the EFL and also look ahead to another weekend, which will soon be upon us. Between now and then, though, take care and thanks for joining us.